Let's meet our next speaker today, and that's Akshay Lamba, CIO from Deloitte. Now, he's an industry leader in the technology arena and has been associated with innovative products such as large IT outsourcing deal across multiple industries, extending enterprise data to mobile platforms and information security paradigms in a Web 3.0 world. He's an alumni of Harvard Business School, Boston, and a revered speaker, widely acknowledged as a next-generation technology expert. Here today, talking on essentials for the next generation customer engagement. Please welcome Akshay Lamba.
Thank you. Thank you.
And your
That's the
clicker.
clicker. All right.
Many thanks.
That's forward and back.
Yes.
Okay.
Doesn't work. Sorry, when we choose to switch.
That's fine. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Akshay Lamba. I'm the CIO for Deloitte Middle East. And yes, the very first question you should be asking yourself is, why is this geek talking to us? I am an IT guy. I run technology. I run large systems for enterprises. And that's pretty much the reason why I'm here today. What we wanted to do was share what we consider is the next step towards evolution of technology systems to support the entire customer journey and the customer experience. So I've kind of kept it pretty simple. There's just three things that I'm going to talk about. One, and this is not new. I know most of the marketing and the sales and the customer service leaders here already know this. This is typically the three things that you look at. One, knowing your customer. Two, engaging your customer. And lastly, designing the customer experience. What we're going to talk about here today is around what are the next potential steps that we can take in those three paradigms, and how can technology support that. So let's start with the first one, which is know your customer. Now, before I even jump into this, allow me a second to share an experience I had just a few days ago. My wife is in the media business. She runs a radio station in the city. And a couple of days ago, we were heading out to office together. And as we got out of home, she got onto a call with one of her customers. And the conversation that I overheard was something like this, where she reached out to a customer saying, hey, we met up last evening, and in hindsight, I just wanted to ask you that I noticed that you were limping yesterday. And I remember from a few months ago, you had a hamstring operation. So I just wanted to catch up real quickly and ask you if everything's okay, or if there's anything I can do to help you or support you. Now, that interaction was way beyond data. It was way beyond analytics. It was more about having the right sense of correlation in terms of historical data and current state. And it had to do with the right empathetic response that the customer needed at that point in time. So I obviously appreciated it. I'll be candid enough to say the appreciation had a large part to do with the fact that I needed dinner that evening too. Having said that, it is a point to be viewed very seriously. A number of enterprises today, even as we speak, look at knowing your customer or knowing your client as collecting information that is directly aligned to your business. Now, that's typically demographic data or data a little beyond that, structured data, data that you would take from the consumer, typically put into a database and use at the right point in time, which is well and good. It works up to a certain point in time. But a lot of companies today, typically banks, telecom companies, etc., now look at data streams which is beyond what they have in their own systems, right? So they look at, can we pull data out of social media? Can we pull out data from online transactions. Can we pull out data from historical web searches, and then incorporate that data and create a profile? That's another way of, that's probably the next evolution from looking at just structured internal data. But go beyond that, and this is where the magic is starting to happen, is how do you start to collaborate that data, correlate that data, and come up with insight? Now that's, again, typically large analytics engines do that. It's not something that we're looking for in the future. It's already there. But the next step, which is what correlates to my experience a few days ago, is you already have all this data now. We've got structured data, we've got unstructured data, we've got the analytics capabilities. We can create insights out of it. But the next step about knowing your customer is about, can we predict correctly, or up to a certain point of accuracy, how he feels at that point in time, and hence what's the right empathetic response to that customer at that point in time. So when we reach that stage where we can say, for every interaction with a client, I know what his current emotional state, physical being is, and hence I'm able to reasonably predict what would be the right empathetic response to a given situation or query. That's when we believe you start to really know your customer. And that's, on the technology side, that's where artificial intelligence is now starting to play a role. So we're doing some amount of work on it and collaborating on that topic across the industry. But let's move on to, that's just know your customer. The next step is engage your customer, right? And I'm not going to talk about the top part of this slide, which is pretty much what life is today. You've got a whole host of engagement channels, whether it's physical or virtual, the mobile web, an application, SMS, websites, all of it. Fantastic. The question now is, you've got all these channels that are in place, but how do you now get to a point where your customer engagement is pervasive? So you're actually engaged all the time, but non-intrusive in nature. You see, right now, for all the channels that we have, the client or the customer still needs a point of action to start to engage with a company or with a brand. And now the question is, how do you be pervasive in his life, be always around, just in the background somewhere, and be available to him whenever he needs you, but be non-intrusive in nature? So there's no right answer around it, but you can already see a few organizations taking steps towards that thought process. For example, Amazon, right? Amazon is a e-retailer. It sells products. But its platform, which is the Alexa platform or the Echo product, is basically meant to be a device in every user's home. So it's non-pervasive. It's non-intrusive. It stays in the background till you activate, but it's pervasive. It's always around. And it enables the company to translate that ability to be pervasive and non-intrusive into revenue-generating activities on the back end. Now, another good example of it is Google, right? Google is known for what? Its web searches, right? It's a search engine. How does it make its money? Advertisements, right? And yet, you see Google now going to services like Google Wi-Fi. Now, the intent or the thought process behind that is, again, to get a box into every user's house to be able to generate and monitor data at that point itself, and hence be available to him for any searches that he may need. Now, again, it's a non-intrusive way of being there, but it's pervasive. Every element in your house now talks to Google through that platform. So that's where we believe, engaging your customers is heading. How do we get to a point where we're non-intrusive but pervasive? Be there all the time. That's really the question. And let's step into the third piece, which is the customer experience. So before I actually jump into what we feel is the next generation of customer experience, let's just look at some stats. And this is stats that I'm sure most of the crowd here already knows, but things like a social influencer would typically share a good experience with 9 people on an average, but would share a bad experience with 16. So the impact of a bad experience with your brand is obviously substantially more. The spend of someone with a good experience with your brand is about 140% greater than somebody who's had the least, has had the worst experience with the brand. Tenure. Approximately 5 years on an incremental basis is what a good experience brings to the table from a customer point of view. Now, what's important here is to understand the fact that over the last 4 years, this has changed dramatically. Right? About 4 years ago, you were talking about 35%, if I'm right, 36% of companies that were looking to compete on customer experience. Today, for any brand in any segment, in any industry, it's closer to 90%. So what is really evident is customer experience is the new battlefield. And customer experience is where you're going to make or break a brand going forward. Right? Now, if that's the case, we also need to understand that over that period, over that 4-year period that we're talking about, customer experience has evolved very, very rapidly, or the expectations of a customer experience has evolved very rapidly. A couple of years ago, for example, customer experience was all about at that point in time. When a customer walks into my retail store, or when the customer picks up my mobile phone, at that point in time, what is the experience that he's gaining? That is how it was looked at a few years ago. We all understood very, very quickly that customer starts to engage with the company and the brand way before he actually starts to interact. And we realized that our branding, our experience needs to go way before he actually even starts to interact with us. So whether it's your mobile application or your website, everybody started to focus on the fact that your brand experience across every channel needs to be consistent and needs to be at par, which is again well and good. What's happening today is even going beyond that, and the expectation of the customer now is, for every time I engage with you, what is the value that I derive? Now, that value, and that's really the next part that we're going to talk about, which is that value that a customer derives, does it necessarily have to come from within the organization or the brand that is being presented to him? Or can we leverage systems outside the current environment to give him an experience that will still add value to him? Remember, it's not about the firm anymore. It's about the client. It's about the customer. And his experience expectation now is value-driven. Right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, so before I just jump into a little bit of tech, I wanted to talk about how our lives have changed and just focus around that value proposition that we talked about. What is the value proposition for any brand? For me, for example, as an end user, as a consumer, as a regular consumer in the market, my entire day revolves around the fact that I need to interact with multiple brands, multiple companies, but the experience that I expect goes something like this. So I'm not going to run through the whole thing, but one simple thing like when I wake up, if I'm reaching out for my jeans, I want to be reminded that I have a board meeting today. That's an experience that I expect from technology, from my environment today. Now, imagine for any one of us, right? Imagine if we walk into our board meeting looking the way I look today. It's not going to be okay. Now, there's a lot of value that that transaction would create in my head, in my life. So the question really is, it doesn't matter to me which brand is telling me that. It doesn't matter to me which tech is telling me that. The front-ending technology could be an Amazon, could be a Google, doesn't matter. What matters is that who do I relate that experience with? It may not even be a service that you give. For example, Amazon is not in the business of personal assistance. Amazon is in the business of being a retailer. But it gives you that experience because it adds value, right? Let's just look at it going beyond. You get out of home, you start going towards work, and you get an alert that your daughter's bus route has breached the geo-fence that you allowed. Now, what that typically means is I have an app where I've said, okay, this is home, this is school, this is the route she typically takes, and if the bus moves out of this route, I want to know about it. It's the only reason this might happen is because there's a traffic jam or there's a diversion. It's not something that I have to act on, but I would like to know. That's experience. And it's really important for me to know that. I have an emotional value to that information. Whoever presents it to me is important to me. Right? Again, doesn't have to be your main line of business. But that's the experience you're starting to build with the consumer. Right? So similarly, heading to the gym, keeping your data about how your weight is moving up and down, also telling you a note that you just don't care. But that's again, it's part of the experience that I expect, irrespective of what is that ecosystem out there of your business. Okay. Now, so the last thing that I really have to share is if that is the requirement, then what is very obvious in today's world is that every organization needs to focus on what that next-gen experience is and may necessarily have to move out of just their organization, of just their capabilities, and maybe have integrated deals with their competition, with other industry members, with even different industries, to give that holistic experience that the consumers today expect. That's really the bottom line. And let me share that with just the last example around it, which is again an Amazon example, which is they created the platform Alexa and then integrated it with a music streaming service called Pandora. They don't sell anything, but it allows me to stream music whenever I want, wherever I want. Pandora has nothing to do with Amazon, right? But that is the experience I expect from Amazon. And every time I get that experience, my emotional state of my relationship with Amazon just goes up the scale. And that's what we believe is really the next generation of customer experience that everybody needs to strive towards. We're doing our own bit about it, but I guess it's given the nature of where everyone needs to get, it has to be a collaborative effort. It's no longer a game of one organization doing just their bit. So thank you. I know I have 5 more minutes, right, for Q&A, or did I eat that up? I ate that up. Okay. All right. So thank you so much for giving me your time. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Akshay Lamba, CIO of Deloitte. And again, if you want to get in touch with Akshay, then do approach him at the coffee break in about 20 minutes from now. take a good look at that face and feel free to approach him.